London in the late 19th century was a place brimming with mysterious tales, but no story shocked the world more than the case of Jack the Ripper. This wasn't just a series of gruesome murders in the Whitechapel district. It became a century-old enigma that remains unsolved. Today, we'll delve into the horrifying details, the investigative efforts, and the list of suspects in the case that turned this killer into a symbol of crime and terror. The story took place in late 19th century England. London, one of the world's most prosperous cities, attracted a large number of immigrants, including refugees. This led to a rapid decline in job availability, leaving many unemployed. Whitechapel, with its low rent, became a haven for low-income residents. Over time, the area housed a large immigrant population. The environment and security in Whitechapel were terrible. To maintain order, the London Metropolitan Police had to increase patrols in the area. Regardless of day or night, police officers were often seen on the streets. However, the police force was still too small compared to the densely packed population, and security did not improve significantly. Whitechapel was a complex place with diverse residents. To survive, some women had no choice but to become prostitutes, working the streets daily for meager earnings. On August 6, 1888, a Tuesday, the first case of a shocking series of murders occurred. At 4:45 a.m., in a residential building on George Yard, a worker heading out to a construction site stumbled upon a horrifying scene. On the first-floor staircase, he discovered the body of a woman lying on her back, partially unclothed, with blood everywhere. The scene was horrific. The worker immediately ran out to the street and found a patrolling officer 5 minutes later, leading him to the crime scene. Upon inspection, the victim was found to have suffered 39 stab wounds, with severe injuries to her lower abdomen and uterus. At 5:30 a.m., a forensic doctor arrived and concluded that the woman had been dead for about 3 hours. Residents of the building were questioned. A woman reported hearing cries for help early in the morning, but thought little of it, as domestic violence was common in Whitechapel at night. Other tenants noted returning home around 2 a.m. and seeing nothing unusual, while one man mentioned spotting someone lying on the stairs around 3:30 a.m., but assumed it was a drunk vagrant. Based on this, the police estimated the time of death between 2 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. The victim was identified as Martha Tabram, a 38-year-old sex worker living at 19 George Street, only 300 meters from the crime scene. Investigations revealed that she had been drinking with 2 soldiers the previous evening at a local bar. At 11:45 p.m., Martha and one of the soldiers left the bar. A patrolling officer later reported seeing a suspicious man wandering near the crime scene around 2:30 a.m. The man appeared to be a soldier in his early 20s, with dark hair and a brown mustache. When questioned, the man claimed he was waiting for an acquaintance and would leave soon. After the murder, the soldier became a suspect. 2 days later, the local military barracks were ordered to gather all soldiers who were on leave at the time of the crime for identification. The officer identified 2 individuals who resembled the man he had seen, but both provided credible alibis and were dismissed as suspects. After weeks of investigation with no progress, a second murder occurred, just 25 days after the first. At 3:40 a.m. on Saturday, August 31st, 1888, a coachman driving through East London was stopped by a man named Charles Cross, who appeared distressed. Cross pointed out a woman lying at the entrance of a stable on Bucks Row in Whitechapel. It was still dark and there were no streetlights, making visibility poor. The 2 men approached the scene and found the woman lying on her back, motionless, with her eyes wide open and her skirt pulled up. When they touched her face, it felt warm, but her hands were ice cold. At 3:45 a.m., a patrolling officer arrived at the scene. With the light from his lamp, they discovered the woman's face was bruised. Several teeth were broken. Her neck had 2 stab wounds, and her abdomen had been slashed open with her intestines protruding. The scene was gruesome. At 4 a.m., a forensic doctor arrived and estimated the time of death at around 3:30 a.m., only about 15 minutes before Cross and the coachman found the body. The murder weapon was a knife 15 to 20 centimeters in length, possibly a folding knife, a Bowie knife, or a surgical knife. The precise incision suggested that the killer had some anatomical knowledge. The victim was identified as Mary Ann Nichols, a 43-year-old sex worker residing at a lodging house on Thrall Street. Investigations revealed that at 1:20 a.m. on the night of the murder, Mary returned to her lodging house. Unable to pay rent, she left shortly after. At 2:30 a.m., a friend saw her sitting on a nearby street corner, appearing intoxicated. The friend offered to accompany her home, but Mary refused and walked toward Bucks Row alone. At 3:15 a.m., a patrolling officer passed by the stable but noticed nothing unusual. Just 25 minutes later, Cross and the coachman found Mary's body. There were no additional witnesses or unusual noises reported for this case. Police briefly suspected Cross, theorizing he might have stumbled upon the coachman after committing the murder and pretended to be the one discovering the body. However, Cross was eventually cleared of suspicion. The identity of the murderer remained a mystery. Within 1 month, 2 gruesome murders had taken place in Whitechapel, prompting speculation that the 2 cases were connected. Both victims were sex workers, and the killer's methods were disturbingly similar. However, the police initially believed the similarities were coincidental and saw no evidence linking the cases. Yet, only 8 days later, another murder occurred in Whitechapel. At 5:45 a.m. on Saturday, September 8, 1888, a coachman living at 29 Hanbury Street discovered a woman lying on the ground behind a house with her head near the doorstep, about 15 centimeters from the threshold. Police arrived and investigated the scene. The victim's abdomen had been slashed open, her intestines draped over her right shoulder, and her throat had 2 deep cuts. Her uterus and part of her bladder were missing, likely taken by the killer. The weapon was again identified as a 15 to 20 centimeter knife. Items found at the scene included 2 pills, a torn envelope, a piece of coarse fabric, a comb, and a leather strap. The victim was identified as Annie Chapman, a 47-year-old sex worker who was severely ill with lung disease. She lived in a lodging house at 35 Dorset Street. Police interviewed residents of the building where the body was found. One man reported checking his basement door at 5 a.m. due to recent break-ins, then sitting on the back steps to cut a piece of leather. He claimed no one else was in the backyard at the time. Another man mentioned hearing a woman scream around 5:15 a.m. A female resident reported seeing Annie talking with a man at 5:30 a.m. on the street. She described the man as about 40 years old, slightly taller than Annie, with dark hair, wearing a dark coat and a brown hat. As she passed, she overheard the man ask Annie, "Will you agree?" And Annie replied, "Yes." Based on these accounts, police estimated Annie's time of death to be between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m. At the crime scene, police found a torn envelope postmarked from London on August 28, 1888. Following this lead, they identified a man named Edward Stanley, who was Annie's romantic partner and often spent weekends with her. However, Edward provided a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect. The chaotic environment of Whitechapel, coupled with the lack of eyewitnesses or clear descriptions of the perpetrator, made solving the case extremely difficult. This time, police released some details of the crime to the public, hoping for leads. Not long after, rumors began circulating that the murders were linked to a local man named John Pizer. Pizer, a 38-year-old Polish Jew and shoemaker, was nicknamed Leather Apron and had a history of threatening women with a knife. Local tabloids published these rumors, prompting police to search Piser's home, where they found 5 long knives. However, Piser provided a credible alibi for the times of the murders. He later sued the tabloids for defamation and received compensation for damages. 19 days after the crime, the Central Press Office received a letter purportedly from the killer. Written in red ink, it read, "Dear boss, I keep hearing that the police are closing in on me." That's a joke, isn't it? They're so confident, but I can't help but laugh when they think they've figured me out, especially with all that nonsense about Leather Apron. I hate prostitutes, and I won't stop ripping them until you catch me. The last one was excellent, wasn't it? She didn't even have time to scream. How will you ever catch me? I love my work and will keep at it. Soon you'll hear of my next fun. I left a bit of red ink for you in a ginger beer bottle last time, but it went sticky and wasn't much use. Red ink seems more satisfying. Haha. Next time I'll cut off the victim's ears and send them to the police. Keep this letter safe. I'll let you know when I've done more. My knife is so sharp and wonderful. If I get the chance, I'll work immediately. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. The letter writer identified himself as the killer and mocked the police. Authorities initially dismissed the letter as a cruel prank and did not release it to the public. However, shortly afterward, the 4th murder took place in Whitechapel. At 1 a.m. on Sunday, September 30th, 1888, a coachman discovered a woman lying in Duffield Yard, Whitechapel. The victim was identified as Elizabeth Stride, a 44-year-old sex worker. Police arrived to find 2 stab wounds on her neck and bruises on her chest. The cause of death was determined to be excessive blood loss from her left carotid artery. Unlike previous cases, her abdomen was not mutilated. A witness reported seeing Elizabeth around 12:35 a.m., speaking with a man of medium build wearing a long black coat. He overheard Elizabeth saying, "No, not tonight, some other night." Another witness claimed to see Elizabeth being attacked around 12:45 a.m. by a man described as approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, with dark hair and a brown mustache. The man reportedly tried to drag Elizabeth into the street, but pushed her down when unsuccessful. Because the method differed slightly from earlier cases, police did not immediately link Elizabeth's murder to the previous crimes. However, just 45 minutes later, at 1:45 a.m., a patrolling officer discovered the body of another woman in Mitre Square, less than a kilometer from where Elizabeth was killed. The victim, identified as Catherine Eddowes, a 46-year-old sex worker, had her throat cut and abdomen mutilated. Her intestines were placed over her right shoulder, and her left kidney and much of her uterus were removed and taken from the scene. Police speculated that after killing Elizabeth, the killer attempted a similar attack on Catherine but was interrupted, forcing him to flee. Encountering Catherine shortly after, he murdered her and carried out his gruesome ritual. The officer who discovered Catherine's body noted that he had patrolled the area at 1:30 a.m. without seeing anything unusual, suggesting her death occurred between 1:30 and 1:45 a.m. At 3 a.m., another officer found a bloodied piece of Catherine's apron on Goulston Street, near graffiti written in chalk on a nearby wall. The message appeared to blame Jews for the murders. Concerned the message might incite anti-Semitic violence, police ordered its immediate removal. The double murder caused widespread panic among Whitechapel residents. Frustrated by the police's inability to solve the case, local merchants formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by George Lusk. The committee organized nightly patrols and offered a £50 reward for information. 2 days after the murders, the Central Press Office received another letter, also written in red ink, with the following content. "I told you before it wasn't a joke. Dear boss, tomorrow you'll hear about Jack the Ripper's double event. Too bad the first woman screamed, so I didn't have time to cut her ears off. Thanks for keeping the last letter quiet. It was hot stuff. Jack. The handwriting matched the first letter, and this time, the writer referred to himself as Jack the Ripper. He took responsibility for both murders. However, the letter was sent 24 hours after the killings and contained details already published in newspapers, leading police to suspect it was another hoax, likely written by a journalist. Despite this, the release of the letters caused public outrage. The name Jack the Ripper, first mentioned in the letters, became synonymous with the unknown killer. On October 16, 1888, George Lusk, the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, received a peculiar letter with an attached package. The letter read, "From hell. Dear Mr. Lusk, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman. The other half I fried and ate. It was very nice. I might send you the bloody knife that took it out if you wait a while longer. Catch me if you can. Yours truly." Unlike the previous letters, this one did not include the name Jack the Ripper and was far less polished, filled with spelling and grammatical errors. The package contained a small wooden box with what appeared to be half a human kidney, preserved in alcohol. Police took this matter seriously and sent the kidney for examination at the Royal London Hospital. The doctors confirmed it was a human left kidney and speculated it could have belonged to Catherine Eddowes, whose left kidney was missing. However, the forensic methods of the time were not advanced enough to definitively confirm this connection. Some suggested the kidney might have been from an animal, sent by someone playing a cruel joke. To this day, the authenticity of the letter and kidney remains debated. As the investigation stalled, another murder shocked Whitechapel. On Friday, November 9, 1888, at 10:45 a.m., a landlord's assistant arrived at 13 Miller's Court, Dorset Street, to collect overdue rent from Mary Jane Kelly, a 25-year-old sex worker. Mary had been behind on rent for 6 weeks. Finding no response, the assistant tried the door but found it locked. Peering through a broken window covered by fabric, he moved the cloth aside and was horrified by what he saw. Mary lay on her bed in a pool of blood, her body mutilated beyond recognition. He immediately called the police. Mary's small room contained a bed, 3 tables, and a few chairs. The crime scene was horrific. Mary's throat was slit, her abdomen cut open, and her organs removed and placed around the room. Her breasts had been severed, her face was slashed beyond identification, and her heart was missing from the scene. The forensic examiner concluded Mary had died from a slit throat before being mutilated. The weapon was identified as a knife, approximately 2.5 centimeters wide and 15 centimeters long. The method and choice of weapons suggested this was the work of Jack the Ripper. A friend of Mary's provided valuable testimony, stating that around 2 a.m. on the night of the murder, Mary borrowed 6 pence from her before leaving. Shortly after, the friend saw Mary with a man believed to be in his 30s, of Jewish appearance, wearing a dark coat and a low-brimmed hat. The man appeared to avoid being seen, pulling his hat down as they walked. They were last seen heading toward Mary's home at 2:45 a.m. Unfortunately, police were unable to identify the man. After this crime, Jack the Ripper seemed to vanish. No further murders with similar patterns were reported in London, leaving investigators baffled. This led some to believe the killer had either died, been imprisoned for another crime, or left the country. Some argue that the murders of the 2nd to 5th victims, Mary, Annie, Elizabeth, and Catherine, all involved abdominal mutilation, making them part of what are known as the canonical 5 victims. Meanwhile, the first victim, Martha, who was stabbed multiple times but not disemboweled, might have been killed by someone else and is often excluded from Jack the Ripper's confirmed victims. Regardless, the series of murders caused widespread fear and panic throughout England. The name Jack the Ripper became synonymous with terror. To solve the case, the British government assembled a team of top investigators. At the time, Arthur Conan Doyle's detective novels featuring Sherlock Holmes were immensely popular, so authorities invited the author to assist with the investigation. The team identified several commonalities among the victims. They were all prostitutes, mostly married with children, and heavy drinkers. None appeared to have resisted fiercely, suggesting the killer was physically strong and capable of quickly subduing his victims. The killer seemed to have some anatomical knowledge, as evidenced by the precise incisions and organ removal. Investigators theorized that Jack the Ripper could be a doctor or butcher. Extensive investigations of London's medical professionals and slaughterhouse workers yielded no viable suspects. Queen Victoria even proposed that the killer might be a sailor working on ships docking at London's ports on Thursdays and Fridays, departing by the weekend, coinciding with the murder's timing. Police examined ship logs but found no conclusive matches. After combing through over 2,000 potential suspects, authorities narrowed the list to about 300 individuals, 80 of whom were seriously investigated. Despite these efforts, the investigation yielded no concrete results. In 1892, after 4 years of extensive investigations consuming significant resources, the police officially suspended their inquiry. The Jack the Ripper case remains one of the most infamous unsolved serial murders in British and world history. Over the decades, countless detectives and researchers have attempted to crack the case. While no definitive answers have been found, certain patterns and profiles have been identified. Jack the Ripper had some degree of anatomical expertise, carried out his crimes under the cover of darkness, and moved swiftly and stealthily, indicating a high level of skill with a knife. He consistently targeted prostitutes, perhaps due to personal experiences or deep-seated hatred. The murder's timing suggests he held a stable job, possibly allowing him weekends off to commit his crimes. Among the many suspects investigated were Montague John Druitt, a 31-year-old lawyer whose father was a prominent surgeon. Montague was exposed to anatomical knowledge from a young age. He reportedly suffered from severe mental illness, which ran in his family. His mother and grandmother both died by suicide. Montague's body was found in the Thames River on December 30th, 1888, a month after the last murder. Some believe his death marks the end of Jack the Ripper's killing spree. Francis Tumblety, an Irish-born doctor with a history of traveling across Europe, Francis harbored a strong hatred for women, particularly prostitutes. He reportedly boasted about collecting female organs, which he displayed at dinner parties. During the Ripper killings, Francis was arrested in Whitechapel for sexual harassment. Upon learning he was a suspect, he fled to the United States, where he lived until his death. Seweryn Klosowski. Born in Poland, Seweryn trained as a surgical assistant and possessed anatomical knowledge. He moved to Whitechapel before the murders began and later relocated to the U.S. In 1891, he poisoned 3 of his wives, earning him the nickname the Borough Poisoner. He was arrested in 1903 and executed, with some speculating he was also Jack the Ripper. Lizzie Williams, a rare female suspect. Lizzie was the wife of John Williams, a royal physician. John had a long-standing affair with Mary Jane Kelly, one of the Ripper's victims. Unable to bear children, Lizzie reportedly became estranged from her husband. Some theorize that, driven by jealousy, she killed the victims and targeted their reproductive organs as an act of symbolic revenge. A 2011 discovery of a surgical knife matching the Ripper's weapon among Lizzie's belongings fueled speculation. Aaron Kosminski, a Jewish immigrant and barber living in Whitechapel, Aaron was considered a prime suspect by police. A witness identified him as the killer but refused to testify, fearing backlash against the Jewish community. Aaron suffered from severe mental illness and was institutionalized in 1891 after threatening a woman with a knife. He died in a mental hospital in 1919 at the age of 53. In 2007, businessman Russell Edwards purchased a shawl allegedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes at an auction. DNA testing revealed genetic material from both Catherine and an unidentified male. The male DNA matched a descendant of Aaron Kosminski, leading Edwards to claim Aaron was Jack the Ripper. However, experts questioned the results, citing potential contamination of the shawl over time. The DNA evidence has never been independently verified, leaving the conclusion controversial. Due to the limitations of forensic technology at the time, evidence was not well preserved. Investigators also lacked awareness of proper crime scene preservation. If the evidence had been handled carefully and modern forensic techniques applied, the case might have been solved. More than a century has passed, yet Jack the Ripper's identity remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Was the killer a medically trained individual, as some theories suggest, or simply a cunning madman? The answer may forever be buried in the sands of time. So, what do you think? Who was Jack the Ripper? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know if you found this video intriguing. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.